Hi everyone! So today I'm going to be interviewing Peyton Dessert on some opening questions that she was given for her multicultural classroom. So go ahead and sit back. We're going to go through this interview really quick to get her opinion on how she thought the class went. Okay, Peyton. So the first question we have for you is how would you describe race relations in America? You know what? That is a great question. And, for me, I think that race relations in America is a difficult topic to understand, but after taking my multicultural classroom class that I took this spring, I was able to understand it more as things such as like splitting them up into like race and racism and anti-racism. And I think once people are able to understand those definitions and are able to see like what race really is like in America, I think people can get a better understanding of it. I know I had said before coming into this class that a lot of people don't know, have no problem or don't have any issues with people of other races. But then there are some people who do, and it's just because that they think that their race may be superior to their own, or their ego is too high for some people. And really there's nothing wrong with it, but it's almost like they're not willing to get to know another race and things like that. I know for me now, I look at it as race relations in America as something that we as Americans really need to work on, especially in our schools. Kids are getting picked on and bullied and not getting the proper educational resources they need just because of their race. Awesome, Peyton. All right, so our next question for you is what aspects of your ethnic and cultural identity do you most value or identify with, and why? Okay, so for who I identify with, I guess for my aspects of my ethnic and cultural identity, I would definitely say that I identify most with my generation. Obviously, we all are all of the same age. We go to all of that, have the same values and stuff like that. But I would also see myself kind of looking into the younger generation as to kind of what this cultural identity of America is becoming. I think that they have a lot of insight and they are more open to change, I think, than my generation is a little bit. Not to say that my generation is not open to change, but because we're slightly older, I have tend to realize that I don't do well with change, and I think that plays a factor into race a little bit and how I see things. Now, I don't see any issue with race. I treat everybody equally. I respect everybody equally. It doesn't matter the color of their skin. I see them as just another human being that I can get to know. And especially as a future teacher, if any of my students, they're all my students, no matter the color of their skin. But I would think that for me, my cultural and ethnic identity kind of more relate to my generation and possibly the younger generation. Awesome. So our next question is, what factors contribute to the long-standing racial achievement gap in our country too? So when I think of this racial achievement gap, I tend to think of that politics and racial identity and racial differences make the biggest factors. But after taking some time and kind of educating myself more, I definitely think that depending on where people are located, where they go to school, the resources that they receive, the teachers, the equipment, textbooks, notebooks, pencils, papers, stuff like that, I think plays an even bigger factor than politics, racial identity, and like racial differences and all that. Not to say that those things don't affect it, but I definitely think that where people grow up, I think has affected the racial achievement gap differently. Obviously, it has been studied and research has been done on it that students who go to low-income schools are typically more diverse students and they typically are on the low scoring end of standardized testing or any other testing that they do happen to do, just because they don't have the funding or the support from the government and from anywhere else that they would be able to receive their educational resources. And I think that plays a huge factor on their achievement gap, because that's how they learn. That's what they're learning from. And if a student in a more wealthier area or a student who is able to get a slightly better education is obviously going to have a better advantage, and it just so happens that race plays a huge factor in that, and that our education system also plays a huge factor in that as well. Awesome. So our next question is it helpful to point fingers at individual people or groups of people for past injustices? So this would be things like slavery or the exploitation of Native Americans. So for this, I would say I do not believe it would be helpful to point fingers at individual people or even groups of people. I think it's just, there's no way that it can be fair. I think with everything going on in the world, pointing fingers just doesn't help. It just honestly makes situations worse. So I would tend to side with no, I don't think it would be helpful. It's something that obviously needs to be addressed, and there's issues that need to be fixed, but pointing fingers would just not help at all. It would probably only make the situation worse and make groups of people or individuals more upset with other groups or other individuals. All right, next question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very important, how important is it for teachers to be aware of cultural norms among their students? And please explain. I would probably say, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give it a 10. I think it's super important for teachers to be aware of their students' cultural backgrounds, their cultural norms, who they identify as. It only makes students feel more comfortable about themselves being in your classroom. It makes them feel accepted, loved, cared for, and it just gives them a sense of a safe space that they can come to school and they're not going to get judged for anything. The color of their skin, the way they talk, their native language, the things that they eat, the traditions they celebrate. Honestly, it probably makes them feel better when you, as the teacher, explain to other students, hey, we have a student who does this, or hey, we're going to learn about this culture because we have a few students who are from this culture. And sometimes students may not feel comfortable with sharing, or they don't like the attention, but sometimes students are more than happy to share their cultural identity. And so, yes, I would say it is super important to be aware of other students' cultural identities. Awesome. All right, our next one. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very well prepared, how prepared do you feel to work in schools with a high percentage of minority students? And please explain. Okay, I would say probably around a 7 or 8. I definitely feel more comfortable now after doing some research, taking some classes, and being a little bit more prepared, and kind of being in an field experience placement where I did work with more diverse classes, so I feel slightly more prepared, but I'm still slightly nervous. I feel like I need to do a lot more research, figure out kind of how students act, and kind of the things that they expect from me, I guess. I don't want to put any student in an uncomfortable situation. I don't want to make them not feel like I don't care as a teacher. I don't want to make them feel selected or be like the center of attention if they don't like that. I want to be, that teacher that these students can come to if they have an issue with their race, their culture, their whatever. But I think I just need more experience, and I need to be willing to do research, and I need to be willing to obviously get to know my students who are in those minority categories. Awesome. All right, our next question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very well prepared, how prepared do you feel to work in schools with a high poverty rate? And please explain. Okay, so for this one, I would say probably an 8. I feel pretty comfortable and pretty prepared to teach in a lower income and a more poverty-restricted school district. I think as a physical education major, obviously I have learned to come up with activities on the fly and stuff to get them moving if there's not a lot of equipment. But I feel like even with that, I would be willing to, help out my school, do fundraising, do things like that, to help them get the things that they need, the resources that they need to be a good educated school district. I think that no matter what your school budget is, where you work, as long as you are there for the kids, to teach the kids not only education but how to be kind to one another and how to be confident in themselves and in their work that they do, and motivate them to be the best version of themselves in school and out of school, I think that everyone then is prepared to work in a poverty-restricted school district. Alright, so our next one. How would you begin to create a classroom that is respectful to the dignity of all your students? I would probably start with treating my students kind of all at the same level, and then obviously as the year goes on, there will be certain students that I don't need to pay attention to all the time, that I know that they'll get their work done, I know that they're willing to do extra things, and then I'll have my students who need a little bit more assistance, which is great. I love spending time with them anyway, so it wouldn't be a burden to me. I want to make them feel like they're smart and that they're important. And also it shows kids that, even though somebody might not be great at an activity, or for me for physical education, just because somebody isn't great at a game doesn't mean that they're not a great person, or that just because they don't like to try as hard as some other kids doesn't mean that their personality isn't great, and that doesn't mean that they're not a great student in other subjects. It just means that they may not like PE, which is totally okay. So I think just, being very open-minded and explaining to students, everyone is different, everyone is unique, but everyone is loved by me, by their families, their friends, by God. Everyone is loved. Our next one, how are the constructs of race and disability linked? So I kind of see this as a tricky question to answer. I'm not really 100% sure. I used to think that some people would think just because of the color of your skin you immediately have something wrong with you, or that you're just not like us, or that you're not like a certain group. And that's definitely not the case. People, just because there's a difference with the color of your skin, or just because that there is a difference with how you act or how you learn, especially how you learn, does not mean anything less of you. I think a lot of students don't see that, and a lot of students struggle with that, is that they think that just because they're not learning at the same speed as others, or just because they're not smart as other students, that they have some type of disability, or just because of the color of their skin, that they have a disability. And I think a lot of people tend to link those together, and it's so sad, because that's just not the case. I think with the information that I have learned, I've seen how they can be linked, but I still think that people need to look into race and disability as two separate things instead of things that are linked together. Alright, and our last question. Name some cultural values that exist among Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and White Americans. Okay, so for Black Americans, I would say probably their history and the money that they earned. I know sometimes that they work very, very hard for the money that they earned, and they celebrate their history, they love who they are, they love where they came from, and they want to be recognized for that. So those are kind of two things that I kind of thought of. For Hispanic Americans, I would definitely say hard work and family. They pretty much start from ground zero and work their way up. They work so hard just to put food on the table, to get their kids into a good education system, something that they didn't have. get them the things that they want, the things that they need, because they didn't have those things. And then obviously family. I feel like Hispanic families are very big, and they very emphasize that and love spending time with each other. For Asian Americans, I would say probably education. They work very, very hard to make sure that they get good grades, they get a good education system. I think another thing with that is traditions. They work really hard to keep those traditions going. They try not to go into new traditions because they like the old traditions. And then for Native Americans, I would say also traditions, more of like the family and cultural things, especially since they're a very tight-knit community. They want to keep those traditions and those cultural beliefs, those cultural norms, the food, stuff like that. They want to keep that there. And that kind of goes into background as well. And then also, too, I thought of their name. So like that family name, because they're so small, they're very, very prideful in their name. And then for white Americans, some things that came to mind were money and education. They take pride in the work that they do. They sometimes brag about it a lot, about the money that they earn. But then there's some white Americans who don't make a lot of money, and they take pride in the money that they do make. And then the same thing kind of with education. White Americans can tend to brag about the education that they get, but some are also very prideful in the education that they get, and it shows with how hard they work. Alrighty, and that is the end of our interview, so I hope you guys enjoyed.